Right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out, you guys. This story right here, this is a long story. It's probably going to be a multiple part story. So without further ado, I'm going to get straight into it. There's a lot going on in this story. This is a story that I've been previewing for a couple of months. However, before I got into it, I wanted to make sure that I got all the information. There's a few things that I wanted to vet in this story that I had to follow up on. That's why it took me a little bit of time to put this story out. Anyways, without further ado, let me get straight into it. But the next incident in the indictment we're talking about involved the extortion of a local dealer who lied about clavo that was stolen from him, that then led to him being extorted. So according to the indictment, 3 other individuals that were working under the Mexican Mafia's direction, Rosario Mercado Chayo, Ernest Lampley Dopey, and Garrett Estock Chino, were involved in the extortion of this mid-level dealer. So this individual was extorted after it was determined that he made a false claim that a half peso was stolen from him by gang members that were acting under the authority of the Mexican Mafia. The individual that this was a reference to was Chayo, and although Chayo wasn't a Mexican Mafia member, he admitted to being a high-level Mexican Mafia associate in several of his phone calls. Yep, you got it, their phones were tapped as well. They had all 3 of their phone taps, Chayo, Chino, and Dopey. So anyways, this individual was confronted about this supposed half peso that was stolen from him, and at one point, it became obvious that he was lying. When asked to give a straight answer about it, he waffled and backpedaled and couldn't do it. And I guess while they were interrogating him, Dopey punched this guy in the face and told him to tell the truth, otherwise he was going to be shot. In the end, he wouldn't admit it one way or the other. So they ended up telling him that he now owed them $3,000 for lying about the half P. And when he said he didn't have $3,000, they took his car as collateral and they told him they'd give him his car back when he squared up the debt. And that he should actually consider himself lucky that they were only charging him $3,000 for the half P, because at that time they were going for 9 racks. So the next part of the indictment involved an individual by the name of Eduardo Macias, Funny, who was incarcerated at the San Diego detention facility. And like most of the others that got caught up in this investigation, they also had Funny's contraband cell phone tapped as well. This shit's crazy. And if you have a contraband cell phone, this should make you think twice about conducting any illegal activity over the phone. So they had several wiretap conversations of Funnies from his contraband cell phone, but they also had actual recordings from the jail phone that he would occasionally use as well. Man, I'm telling you, these guys were messy. And even though I had made some of the same mistakes and I was just as sloppy when I got caught up myself, I still gotta say it because these guys, they took it to another level. So in several of Funny's wiretapped phone conversations, he identifies himself as working under the direction of the Mexican Mafia, and he also articulated his involvement in an extortion, a conspiracy, and several assaults that had taken place on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. In one conversation, he gave the female he was talking to, believed to be Andrea Dominguez, the FBI informant, a play-by-play breakdown on how to send illegal Mexican Mafia proceeds to someone else, believed to be Mexican Mafia member Sal Diaz, who was brought back to the county jail on an appeal. And here's another crazy detail that these guys brushed off. Sal always had a bad feeling about Andrea. He didn't like her, and he got on the phone one time to confront her and to see if he could flush her out. And after talking to her, he told everyone that Andrea was definitely an informant. She was working with the feds and to stay away from her. But Andrea had garnered so much trust that nobody believed him. And in the end, he ended up being right. So on another call, Andrea confirmed that Funny had been given the keys to that part of the jail. And Funny responded by saying that whenever he left, whenever he caught a chain to prison, that he was going to leave the keys to Smurf from the blocks, a reference to Smurf from Old Town National City Block Boys. In another call between Funny and Andrea, Funny alluded to a sureño that had been caught stealing in the county jail and that he had sent 2 individuals to give him love taps and to also put him on a payment plan. Funny was basically saying that he either sent 2 shooters to hit him or they bebopped him. But either way, they put him on a payment plan to pay the money back that might have also included fines. In several other calls, Funny talks about green lights that he had put on several other individuals in the facility for not conforming with the program. In another call dated July 22nd, 2008, Funny tells Andrea that him and Smurf from Block Boys kicked it off in the jail with the whites. After Funny alludes to this assault and several others that preceded it, the jail deputies were able to pull the videos and identify all the perpetrators by matching up the phone calls with the timestamps. Again, these guys just helped build this entire case against themselves. So the final part of the indictment alludes to an individual by the name of Gerardo Canella, Looney, who was the designated contact in Donovan State Prison. Keep in mind, all these guys are networked in and are all part of the same operation. So here we go again. This stuff's like clockwork. So Looney, he identifies himself as being an associate of the Mexican mafias, who was in charge of one of the yards in Donovan State Prison on behalf of the Mexican mafia. Looney's responsibilities are also articulated in several wiretap phone conversations that he made himself. In these calls, he admits to being in charge of all the clavo that's being sold on that yard, the trafficking, as well as collecting all the tax money, extortion related to the Mexican mafia's activities. He has several phone calls where he discusses monthly car payments, basically the monthly tax money that's collected from all the active sureños in the county jail, also previously referred to by Ronnie Ayala as the light bill. So at one point, they also talk about another individual named Melvin Berg Casper as being in charge of another yard in Donovan State Prison. And then there's a lot of back and forth confusion about contacting the facilitators and making sure that tax money is getting to where it's supposed to go. And again, because of these calls, the feds were able to intercept a handful of letters as well as money order receipts that were all matched up to the dates and times that were discussed in these wiretapped phone calls. A third individual named Rodolfo Lopez, Crazy Boy, was identified as being in charge in one of the 4 yards at Donovan State Prison. They also talk about his expectations and responsibilities while overseeing that yard. That, like the other 2 llaveros that were in charge of overseeing their yards, that he was in charge of overseeing all the clavo that was being sold out there, and that he was responsible for collecting and facilitating the monthly tax money that was being collected on behalf of the Mexican mafia. All these calls resulted in all these guys getting indicted. Every last one of them that I named in these calls were indicted in this operation. You know, they obviously had to corroborate a lot of the information that were taken from these calls, but this definitely put heat on these guys and pointed the feds in the right direction. You know, I can't help but wonder if this resulted in some form of accountability for exposing too much on the phone and for discussing things that didn't need to be discussed. So in other wiretapped communications that were intercepted, made by Crazy Boy, who was in charge of the level 4 yard in Donovan State Prison, he confirms that all others who aren't Mexican got the verde, meaning if you weren't a sureño, a norteño, or a paisa, you had a green light on you. And I'm not speculating when I make these distinctions either. The communications showed who was excluded and who this pertained to. You know, I don't know what kind of yard it was or what kind of politics were playing out on that yard, but it clearly stated verbatim that all whites, Africanos, and others had a green light on them. Crazy Boy also confirms in another call that he was strongly enforcing another policy that had just come down by the big homies, or the Mexican mafia. This policy stated that it was mandatory for any sureño who was carrying a banger or hot contraband to attack and take flight on any correctional officer who attempted to stop him for the purpose of searching him. In other words, if you were one of the ones designated to carry a banger, or you had hot paperwork on you and one of the COs tried to pull you over to search you, you were obligated to take flight on them. This was a policy that was being mandated. You know, I know this kind of contradicts what I was saying earlier about trying to avoid getting into conflicts with some of the COs, but this just goes to show that the times are changing and it's a different mindset now. You know, that's a tough policy to enforce, but I get it, as they obviously didn't want any of their hot contraband or their weapons to be intercepted without making a concerted effort to dispose of it or trying to get rid of it. So apparently after some of these wiretap conversations were intercepted, several incidents occurred on the level 4 yard that Crazy Boy was on. where both the Africano and Asian inmates were attacked by the Sureños. So that's basically the gist of the indictment and the charges that Psycho and his crew faced in this indictment. Again, most of the charges stemmed from wiretapped phone calls, confidential information, and self-admissions that were articulated in their own communications. So as I mentioned early on in this story, this investigation initially focused on Cheeks during the time when he was housed in the San Diego County Jail for close to 7 years. He was indicted in several different investigations, and eventually he was given life in both state and federal prison. But let me backtrack and take you guys a few years back prior to when Cheeks was still housed in Pelican Bay State Prison. While he was there, he started working with an individual named Jason Clipper, Smokey from Eastside San Diego, Euclid Avenue. If you guys remember, I mentioned him in a previous story. At the time, Smokey was short to the house, so Cheeks started priming him up and getting him ready to go back out to the streets. Long story short, Smokey made a laundry list of promises, basically telling Cheeks that he was going to get out and take care of a long list of business ventures that were extremely important to Cheeks. However, instead of Smokey keeping his word, he got out, he started using, and he never took care of anything he promised he was going to take care of. When he met Andrea, he starts working with her, but then he ended up having an affair with her. But here's the thing, because Andrea was still the facilitator at that time, she ends up catching wind that Smokey has a green light on him, and she tells him. When Smokey hears about it, he obviously tries to do some form of damage control, but by then it was too late. He even had the audacity to try to send Andrea up to visit Cheeks to see if she could get the green light rescinded. But Cheeks wasn't having any of it. He was hot. Smokey had sabotaged a lot of business affairs that Cheeks had lined up, and he wasn't happy about it. So at one point, Smokey ends up getting busted and he lands in the San Diego County Jail. You know, he had to have known that it was inevitable that he was going to end up back in the county jail. And once he was there, he had to deal with it. So while he's there, Cheeks puts a green light on him and they end up moving on him like 3 or 4 times. Sporty said the administration kept moving Smokey around, basically trying to hide him. But every time Cheeks would get a line on him, he'd have him moved on again. And according to Sporty, Smokey's a big boy. He's got some size on him. So Sporty said that on a couple occasions, he was embarrassing these guys. But even though they kept moving on him, he never locked it up. I don't know how long he stayed in the San Diego County Jail, but eventually he ended up taking a deal and he caught a chain back to prison. Anyways, I believe later on, Smokey was able to get the green light taken off of him. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I remember. What I think happened is that he ended up landing around some of the right individuals. He played his case and they ended up throwing him a lifeline. And like I said, one of the things that I think helped him out in the long run is the fact that he never locked it up and he stayed strong throughout that entire situation. So with respects to Andrea, that would later end up becoming the star witness, she was someone that Cheeks had placed a lot of trust in. And she was the one that basically was able to connect all the dots. And I'm not just talking about Cheeks, I'm talking about most of the Bealeys from San Diego that she worked for. She was also even connected to Psycho and his crew, as she was one of the main facilitators out there. So Andrea knew a lot. But here's the crazy thing about Andrea, and I think I told you guys about this in that last story about Chapo, but for those of you that might have missed it or didn't see it, I'm going to tell you again. Andrea held the unique position of a highly placed and trusted señora to multiple different Mexican mafia members in the San Diego area. And she was able to do this without actually having been a legitimate señora to a made member. She maintained regular communications with the real señoras of the members she was working for, but she was never really one herself. How was she able to do this? She had garnered so much power and influence that she ran all the local state prisons and the county jail facilities with the approval of the Mexican mafia members from San Diego County, all of them. She was known as a señora by both law enforcement and sureños alike, even though she had no romantic ties to any made member of the MA. Like I said, the only one she had a romantic affair with was Smokey from Euclid Avenue. He was the only one. She was never with a Mexican mafia member in any way, whether it was an affair or married to one. But during the course of time, when she was one of their main facilitators, she worked for Bat, Cheeks, Chino, Psycho, and Ronnie. And for a considerable amount of that time, Andrea was an embedded informant for the FBI, the same violent crimes task force that previously led successful investigations against Weddle Sherm. When he was investigated in Operation In the Hat, they seized the opportunity to cultivate Andrea as an FBI informant, and they did. And although she was operating in an undercover capacity, her tenure as a senora vested her with considerable power from her association with members of the Mexican Mafia. I'll get into Andrea and what happened to her later on this story, but first, let me tell you guys what happened in MCC. So when Psycho got wrapped up and he was housed in MCC, Bat had already been there for a few years and was waiting to go to trial. This was sometime in the beginning of 2009. So according to Sporty, at one point after Psycho got there, they ended up housing him in the SHU, and Bat ends up getting transferred out on another case. And Sporty said that Psycho was the type of Mexican Mafia member that was real laid back. He liked to joke around, and he liked to kick it with the fellas. Meaning, he wasn't on no high power type of shit, simply because he was an Nimero. So Sporty also described Psycho as the type of Mexican Mafia member that liked to drink, he liked to party, he wasn't no bully, and he'd occasionally like to get high off black. Sounds like he was just a regular guy who liked to program with everyone else. So Sporty said that 3 or 4 weeks after Psycho got there, that classification started screening all of Psycho's co-defendants to see who was or who wasn't validated by CDCR. The ones that came back as being validated were being slammed down in the SHU. The ones that weren't validated were being spread all around throughout the entire jail. So Sporty said that he didn't know if it was some kind of game plan for classification to disrupt the structure of the jail insofar as the active Sureños go, but if this was their intentions, it actually benefited these guys and backfired on what they were trying to do. Because when they spread everyone out throughout the jail, Psycho began designating llaveros and his mesa throughout different parts of the jail. All his street crew members that he knew were fiercely loyal to him were placed in positions of authority. So Sporty said that everyone there in the jail knew that it was just a matter of time before something kicked off, before a bomb went off. And then it did. It happened on the 7th floor in the dorms, a place where they usually put first-time offenders. And according to Sporty, they usually don't put that many Southsiders or Sureños in that part of the jail. But the paisas, on the other hand, were thick. They were deep over there. So apparently, this is what happened. There was a Sureño that was playing cards with a paisa. And at some point, they started to argue about the game. I don't know if they had partners or if it was just these two. But whenever there's gambling involved, it always intensifies the game. When the competitive juices start flowing and someone loses money, the potential for someone getting upset is always greater. So as these two start arguing, the Sureño takes off on the paisa. Oh, my shoe. And then, as Sporty described it, all hell broke loose. Sporty said the paisas, they swarmed in from everywhere. They came out of everywhere. And at the end of the day, the Sureños, they ended up taking the L. So after this incident, they took all the perpetrators, everybody that was involved, the paisas and the Sureños, to the SHU. In comparison to some of the melees that happened in prison, this was a small riot. But whenever you have an incident involving two different group segments, it's always considered to be a big thing, especially in the county jail. So when they start bringing everybody back to the SHU, this is obviously when Psycho first hears about what happened. And when he sees some of these young Sureños come in all lumped up, this is when he got upset. So like I told you guys in the beginning of this story, Sporty was part of Psycho's crew. He'd interacted with them for several years, and according to him, he knew him. So when this situation happened, Sporty said that Psycho would usually make smart, calculated decisions and that he would think things through. But this time he acted on impulse and really didn't think about the best course of action. Because Sporty said that this situation, it should have been straightened out and it should have been resolved. But instead, Psycho sends word to all the floors and all the different housing units to start taking flight on the paisas, on site, wherever they see him. And apparently, once he gets word out, a lot of the floors started complying with this directive. They started taking flight on all the paisas in their dorms or in their units. However, the validated Sureños that were on the high power floors, the 10th, 11th, and 12th floors, decided not to comply based on the fact that they felt like this was the wrong call. These were sureños that had been to the joint. A lot of them had been around and they felt like Psycho was doing too much. I personally believe that there was more to it than that these guys either knew something or that something else was in play here. Because a directive coming from a carnale is something that's usually not questioned. It's not open for debate, regardless of whether you feel like it's a good call or a bad call. That's not your place to decide. You're expected to follow those directives. And then if you feel like there's something questionable about that call, then you follow up on it later, after the fact. At least that's how I've been educated. Refusing to follow a directive like this is the most egregious form of insubordination that there is. This could get you whacked. So I just think that there's more to it. Anyway, Sporty said that after this incident kicked off, that the U.S. Marshals were tripping. That based on the fact that it involved two different group segments, the Sureños and the Paisas, they had to do a lot of extra work keeping all these guys segregated or separated. And it also involved putting the jail on modified program. So again, they had to do a lot of extra work, which included a lot more than watching DVDs and taking power naps. Not only that, but this also created chaos for them during court movement because again, they had to keep everybody separated. And here's the thing, the US Marshals knew that the jail was under the guardianship of the Mexican Mafia and that nothing happened in that jail unless it was first cleared by the inmate. So this put a big target on Psycho's back. There had already been several other incidents that kicked off before this, but this involved the entire jail. So at that point, they had had enough of Psycho. So early one morning, a couple days after this incident, they went to Psycho's cell and they told him he had an attorney visit. And according to Sporty, Psycho was happy about this. He was waiting for his attorney to come up because he was getting ready to go to trial. But this ended up being a ruse because after they cuffed Psycho up, put him on an elevator, and then took him downstairs, they escorted him outside where they had a van waiting for him. From there, they took him to the San Diego County Jail and housed him there for a couple of days. This was all done to keep Psycho off balance and to isolate him from the rest of the jail. Or like they say, when you cut the head off, the brain can no longer communicate with the body. So after they housed him in the county jail for 2 or 3 days, they then moved him to GEO, which is a private facility ran by Core Civic that houses federal inmates. Meanwhile, during the time that they decided to shuffle Psycho around, they end up bringing Bat back from wherever he went to court to on his other cases. So when he lands back in the jail, the administration decides to institute its own form of political maneuvering by attempting to play Bat against Psycho. They tell Bat what happened between the Sureños and the Paisas, and I'm sure they expressed their own disdain for having to do all that extra work. Bat probably got the pep talk. We let you guys run your own program, we let you do your own thing, but when we get fronted off and shit happens that makes our job harder, then we've got to make a statement. Blah, blah, blah. Something along those lines. But they also tell Bat that if he runs a smooth program and maintains some level of harmony and equanimity, that he'll get longer visits with his loved ones, that they'll give him more phone time, more commissary items, and that they'll keep him there in MCC until he gets sentenced. And according to Sporty, Bat was ecstatic. That was a proposition that he couldn't turn down. And he assured whoever he talked to that he'd maintain his end of the deal. So Bat doesn't waste no time in tying up the loose ends. He sends word to Psycho that he's not running nothing in MCC, and then he lays into him for the bad call that he made. Bat tells Psycho that he can oversee GEO, the federal facility that they had him housed in, but that he wasn't to involve himself in anything concerning MCC, period. Next, Bat sends general filters to all the floors and all the different housing units, basically putting these guys on notice that Psycho is no longer to be acknowledged as the authority in charge and that he's running the show now. Furthermore, he warns everyone in that facility that if they get rolled up and sent to the SHU for fighting with the Paisas, that they have an issue coming and that they're going to face serious consequences. Bat was pushing a hard line and he wasn't playing. And out of all people, Bat was probably the last Mexican Mafia member that would ever tolerate creating any type of unnecessary friction with the Paisas. Think about it. Here's someone that had an extensive history with working with the Paisas and the cartels in Mexico. So the dynamics of this whole situation couldn't have been any worse for Psycho. Bat had a different way of looking at them. He was another one of those visionaries that wanted to see all raza unite and work together. You got to remember, this is the same guy that got arrested in TJ in 2003 with nothing but paisas. There wasn't a single Sureño on his crew, so again, working with the paisas was customary practice for Bat. Anyway, Psycho basically adhered to everything that Bat implemented. He made no attempts to contest anything he said, which was probably the best thing he could do. Psycho might have been crazy, but he was smart enough to know that if he allowed himself to be drawn into a political firefight with a longtime member like Bat, that it would surely be a career-ending mistake for him, and this was a no-brainer. So fast forward about 6 months later, Bat goes to trial and he loses on the trafficking case that involved his wife and Dato from National City. Dato was wired up working with the feds. He basically set him up, and this was the case that would end up putting Bat on a shelf for good. So after Bat gets sentenced to life in prison, he gets shipped off to a USP called Hazleton, also known as Misery Mountain in West Virginia. He gets there, he gets situated, and after being there for several months, he raises his hand to sponsor a Sureño resident from East LA named Luis Cisneros. Supposedly, he was a hired hitman who was doing life in the feds for a couple of hot ones he had done on behalf of the Arellano Phillies cartel. According to Sporty, he was working as an enforcer for the cartel, and he was also doing hits for the Arizona Mexican Mafia. So this guy was tapped in, and Bat felt like he was ready. So Sporty wasn't sure whether this guy's membership was ever sanctioned or not, but Bat only ended up staying in Hazleton for a couple of months before he ended up getting shipped off to USP Canaan. So according to Sporty, Bat got into some kind of conflict with the Mata Salvatruchas, and although Sporty didn't expound on what happened or why Bat was pushing the issue, but supposedly Bat wanted to get all the Mata Salvatruchas blasted off of that yard. It might have been behind an isolated incident that kicked off right there in USP Canaan, or it might have been behind other issues that were kicking off in the federal BOP. But Bat was pushing hard to get this green light sanction. However, another longtime senior member of the Mexican Mafia named Richard Martinez, Gato, who was actually one of Bat's homeboys from San Diego, had the keys to the yard and wouldn't allow it. There wasn't any friction between Bat and Gato. These two had a lot of respect for each other, but Gato just didn't agree with the call and he wouldn't allow it. So at some point, Bat ends up getting shipped out of USP Canaan and they send him out to Bloody Beaumont. I'm not sure how long he ended up staying in Bloody Beaumont either. It was probably only for a couple of months and then they would end up shipping him off again. So in this next picture, Bat's on the left and the guy on the right wearing the beanie is another Mexican Mafia member named George from Venice. However, not long after this picture was taken, George ended up locking it up. Sporty said that he wasn't sure why he locked it up, but he knows for sure that he's no longer in good standings. The other guy in the middle is a camarada that Bat apparently took a liking to. This next picture is another picture of Bat and George with two of their camaradas that are kneeling down. So like I said, when Bat was in Bloody Beaumont, at some point they end up shipping him off to ADX Supermax in Colorado, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. As for Psycho, they ended up shuffling him around to several different USPs as well. At one point, he ends up in USP Lee with Big Joe, the other Mexican Mafia member in this picture, with two paisas that are kneeling. This next picture is of Psycho with several other Sureños that he was with in USP Lee as well. Here's another picture of Psycho with Big Joe at USP Lee with two other paisas that are kneeling down. And then here's one other picture with Psycho and Big Joe with several other Sureños at USP Lee. This next picture is of Boo Boo from Logan Heights, another well-known Pili from San Diego. The next two pictures are of Sal Diaz, Boo Boo's brother while he was in USP Coleman. The Diaz brothers are another highly respected family within the Mexican Mafia. They're referred to as the Diaz brothers even though Sal has a different last name, that being Colavea. So Carlos, who's also known as Robot, was the first one inducted. Out of the two, Robot is probably the more aggressive one. And it's widely known throughout the organization that Sal was made for the love the Carnales have for Robot. Sal has never contributed to the Mexican Mafia in any significant matter and is known as a no account. This doesn't mean he's respected any less. It just means he hasn't made as many noteworthy contributions as his brother has. The next two pictures are of Jose Rodriguez, Fox, and USP Sandy, another longtime senior member of the Mexican Mafia who was the primary target in another federal racketeering operation called Operation Dirty Thirds. The next picture is of Frank Madriaga, Chino from National City, another longtime senior member of the Mexican Mafia. This picture was taken in USP Victorville with other Sureños from San Diego County. The last couple of pictures are just random pictures of other Sureños Sporty was with in different USPs. I released a couple of these pictures in the last story that I did called The Mexican Mafia Offers Protection to El Chapo. But aside from that, these are exclusive pictures that you can only see right here on Paradigm Media News. So to wrap this up, let me just say this with respects to Psycho from Paradise Hills. According to my source, Psycho's status is questionable. I personally don't have any insight about his status myself, but this is what Sporty said. Apparently, while Psycho was still in MCC, Silent George heard about the inappropriate relationship that he was having with his daughter, and he wasn't happy about it. After all he did to help Psycho, he felt like Psycho just turned around and stabbed him in the back and blatantly disrespected him. Silent George was well aware of the fact that his daughter was an attractive young woman. So he kind of seen this coming and he warned Psycho not to cross those lines. But Psycho obviously didn't take these warnings serious and he ended up learning the hard way. And here's the thing, if Psycho was concerned about Silent George hearing about it, his actions were completely contradictory to this because he made no attempts to hide his relationship. While he was there in MCC, he had her pictures taped to his wall, and several of the other Sureños, they seen the pictures. They knew who she was, and he would even talk about her, but nobody said nothing about it. She ended up becoming the big white elephant in the room, a topic that they all knew about, but purposely stayed away from. It's possible that one of his own crew members might have even gave him up, or that Silent George's daughter might have even told her dad herself. However it came out, Silent George found out about it. And when he caught wind of it, he clipped Psycho's wings. He revoked his membership and told him to cover up the 2 black hand tattoos that he had gotten while he was on the streets. I don't know what the protocol is, meaning I'm not sure about the details as to whether or not this went before a vote or what the process is insofar as Psycho having to comply with getting his tattoos removed. All I was told is that Psycho's wings were clipped and that he was no longer a Beely. But again, this was information that was passed on to me by my source. Information that I can't confirm one way or the other. The other thing that Sporty said is that after Psycho got his wings clipped and got himself in hot water, he apparently fell off the map and went MIA. In fact, when they looked him up and they finally did get a line on him, the BOP showed that he was housed in a residential re-entry men's home. Sporty said that this is something that's highly uncharacteristic and that there's no way he should have been in a program like that. But since then, he hasn't heard nothing else about him. Meanwhile, I guess at some point, Andrea's conscience started talking to her and she felt guilty about what she had done. So much so that after everything she did, she reached out to Psycho and apologized while sobbing and expressing how sorry she was. And this would later lead to her getting outed and turned on all the way around. Because after Andrea started cooperating, she was then enrolled in the Federal Witness Protection Program and moved out of state. And while she was being held in the program, she started sending Glavo back to California to some of the people she was still in contact with. And when the feds heard about it, she was terminated from the program and charged with distribution and sales. Now, I'm not sure where Andrea is at today, but if she's smart, she'll try to reestablish her life somewhere else instead of trying to convince those that she burned how sorry and how guilt-ridden she has become. All that people care about when it comes to her is retribution. Retribution on any level that they can get. If she's smart, she understands this. If she's naive, they'll set a trap, she'll fall for the ruse, and someday you'll hear about them finding her body. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for just continuing to tap into the channel. With that said, you guys enjoy your week and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.